Today's podcast is brought to you in part by Challenge Detroit. Challenge Detroit is a full-time job opportunity that lets you get involved in our community. Perfect for a recent college graduate, someone looking for a career change, a new challenge, and people passionate about Detroit and making a difference right here. Applications close on April 13th. Apply online at challengedetroit.com/application. That's challengedetroit.com/application. Hey friends, welcome to your Daily Detroit. It's Friday, April 8th, 2022. I'm Jer Stays. Today, we're going to try some wine and talk about wine in Michigan and Detroit. Yes, it's a growing thing, and our guest from Detroit Vineyards is not only going to walk us through some bottles for spring, but share some insights on the industry, give you some things to think about when it comes to your perceptions of wine in our great grape state, and yes, how what's happening in the wider world impacts a local business. All right, here in the North End studio, it is a full house, and our guest of honor is Chris Southern. He's a winemaker and general manager for Detroit Vineyards. Welcome back to Daily Detroit. It's been a while. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
There are new things to try and taste, of course. To my left is Mr. Devin O'Reilly, our man about town. How are you?
I'm really good, Jared. Drag me all the way over here for this special occasion. Obviously, it involves tasting some booze, so I am gung-ho for it.
Dragged is a loose term, right?
Right. You didn't have to twist my ear too much.
Just so listeners know real quick, Detroit Vineyards, you're doing some really innovative things in the city. Kind of, how did you come around to this in like the 30-second version for those who haven't met you before?
Myself personally, I was recruited to take the winery over in September 2019, so right in time for Corona. But
Great timing.
Our program now really is highlighting Michigan wines and agriculture. So everything is made right in the Eastern Market, but I source fruit from all over the state. So pretty much from the Indiana border almost all the way up to Traverse City.
So I'm interested in the sourcing because although there are a lot of wine drinkers in the city, we are very much in an urban setting, and Detroit Vineyards is very much in an urban setting. So when you talk about kind of sourcing, how do you think about where you're getting the grapes from, and what's going to make a good wine locally?
I'm trying to use the best farmers and the best properties that I can. And so a lot of that is relationship building with the individual growers. So in Southwest, I have two growers I've worked with for 3 vintages now. Up north, I've worked with everybody for about 2 years in a row. And so when a wine works for our program, I like to make it, our customers like it, it kind of fits with our ethos. We try to keep those growers. So Bluff Franc is an example of a random wine that we make. Customers love it. I like to make it. We just keep doing it.
Are there any kind of growing opportunities in the city itself?
We have one urban vineyard. It's 3/4 of an acre. Probably will yield a crop this year. That is very much an experiment. There are a lot of tiny vineyards that seem to be associated with old churches in the city. I've had a lot of people reach out and tell me they need help managing this old monk's vineyard.
There was one right by my old house in the University District.
I believe it.
When I biked by, I was like, it's right here. I had no idea. I was so surprised.
I drive past one on Van Dyke, I think, all the time. I'm so curious. Yeah. I don't think it's viable on a commercial scale, but I think urban farming is kind of like clickable. But, hey, we have 700 vines. We'll see what they do this year. If they yield good fruit, we'll have a wine grown in Detroit. So we'll see what happens.
So what do we have in front of us? I know that there is a whole program this year and new things and things you're sharing with us. I have a glass right in front of me, if you can hear it on the microphone.
We have mostly wines that we release just this spring. So this is the white that we released, which is called Sauvage. It is 100% Vignole from a vineyard called Domaine Berrien. So they're in Berrien Springs, south of Benton Harbor, down 94. This is a hybrid varietal, so it ripens really early. It gives a lot of fruit expression, and it retains a lot of acidity. Stainless steel fermented and aged. It's kind of a tropical fruit party.
Ooh.
The story behind Sauvage is just sort of like and I don't want to say odd wine, but it's fun and natural. So we called it Sauvage just because it's kind of feral.
It's very nice, pleasant. Like I said, a fruit party. I would drink this in the spring and the summer. I'm not a sommelier of any kind, so I'm going to only be giving novice notes here. But
you're better for it.
It is. No, it's nice. It's got a fruity flavor. It's light. So very, very drinkable in my opinion.
Yeah, very drinkable. And I think it's important too to make sure that like wine feels accessible to people.
Most of the wines we make are pretty like table ready. Like I'm not making anything that's meant to be aged for 6 years. Most of what we bottle, because we don't really make a ton of wine, like I want everybody to be able to open it kind of right away.
Okay. So before we get into this next tasting, except we have a number of them, how have been things over at your space as everything's been going on, right? Like I don't even need to get into that part. But how have you been doing through it all?
Good. I mean, certainly this year has been easier than last year and the year before. Now we're really starting to see some of the corporate events come back, which midweek especially is really good for us to get a corporate group in to do some wine education. And then the weekends are pretty much back to where they were pre-COVID. So things are beginning to feel a little bit more normal. And it's nice to be able to focus on more like winemaking and long-term planning rather than what COVID is doing. So that's been a welcome change for 2022.
Do you have, you talked about maybe corporate events and things like that. Do you have a lot of kind of individual events? Do you have live music? Are there programming that you're either doing now or thinking about for the spring and summer?
Yeah. So before COVID, we actually were doing a lot of house music. And I'm just now starting to think about bringing that programming back in. This is the first time it's felt normal enough really to do it. We want to run like kind of teeter that totter between being a real winery where people come and do wine tasting and buy wine, but also understanding that we're in the city. And so people are going to want to go to a place that has live music and food and all that stuff. So I'm kind of thinking through that right now. I think the first big activation, just timing wise, is probably going to be for Pride. Like, so we're looking into June.
That sounds excellent. You know, part of the magic of drinking or enjoying wine is the social aspect. So it would make sense that you'd have a space where people would want to make memories.
Yeah. It's a big space too. Most wineries in the country would be like a single counter and like, 1,000 square feet. We have a really large space. So we have to find other things to do with it. Define
large for listeners.
It's 12,000 square feet. It's pretty big. Yeah.
I almost spit out my drink. I did not realize that. Wow. That's impressive.
It's the old Stroh's factory. So the tasting room is actually what was their machine room. So It's a very large space.
Well, I want to talk about kind of the seasonality of it because we're in spring, which is an exciting time for me and for a lot of people in Detroit because things are starting to warm. We're starting to thaw. How do you think about from the seasonality perspective of the wine that you're offering and throughout the year?
So usually what I would prefer to do is release primarily whites in the spring and then do more reds in the fall. The last 2 years have kind of thrown off our ability to plan, so staffing has been a large part of that. So what can we reasonably get bottled? And so I actually released a white and 2 reds for the spring. But next year when I'm back on track, finally from this whole episode, we'll probably do like whites in the spring and mostly reds in the fall.
Have you or will you do a rosé?
We have a rosé in inventory from 19. To be honest, I made more than I probably should have. So we won't make another one probably until next year just so we can deplete the inventory that we currently have.
Do you have it now available or?
Pink stuff for the spring. Yeah, come and get it.
Exactly.
As they say, next.
I'm going to pour you some Gewürztraminer. This is only available to our wine club, but I thought it'd be fun to bring it just because it is kind of an interesting wine. So you'll notice this is kind of like a salmon or like a pale orange color. And that's because this was fermented 100% on the skins. So technically we would call this an orange wine. I actually got the protocol from a winemaker friend of mine out west. And she said, don't worry, the color will drop out. And I went to bottle it and I said, Sonia, this wine is orange. But it is really delicious. It's very kind of benchmark Gewürztraminer because it smells like a garden of roses or like rose water that your grandmother would have. But we retained the nice acidity. So it's still like really crisp and luscious. So really super fun wine. We only made like 35 cases of it.
Okay, let's talk about that wine club really quick.
Yeah, so wine club members elect to receive 3, 6, or 12 bottles twice a year. They get discounts, they get free tastings, and then they get access to special wines like this. So this wine was from the fall for Wine Club. We're about to bottle a Merlot that's only 40 cases. That'll only go to the Wine Club. So, if you're into wine, you want to get cool stuff, this is allocation only.
This calls to me, Devin.
It does. You know why? I don't know because you and I are a little bit more of a beer drinkers. This almost has this smells like a nice Kolsch beer, like fruited Kolsch, really nice.
Yeah, Gewürztraminer means spiced traminer, so it always has a lot of spice to it. And
is it traditionally German wine?
German Austria. Yep.
Now there's your Kolsch.
This comes from a tiny little property east of Traverse City in Yuba, near Williamsburg, Michigan.
I do love some of the names that Michigan cities and places have.
Well, yeah, I mean, Michigan city names are just
Yuba, Dowagiac.
it's a great linguistic exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested, we talked about, I mean, Michigan wines, think are growing. It seems like the Michigan wine industry is only expanding. There's a lot of players. Traverse City was, in the Leelanau Peninsula was a big one early on. That's one that kind of sticks in my head. But can you talk about just that network and how you guys all talk to each other and what that relationship is like? Is it competition? Is it kind of, here's what I got, taste what I'm working on type of thing?
It's interesting. It sort of depends. I personally am on a NPO board that is supposed to be organizing and sort of marketing the wine industry, but nobody gets along on that board. It's really interesting. But I have a group of friends who are sort of like the Traverse City cool kids, and we have been able to get together and do a lot of fun marketing together only because we're passionate about what we're doing and we're trying to get out and push. And so that's been really nice. I spent most of my career in California, so I felt like I didn't have a network when I moved back. And so those connections have been really fun to make with our growers. And then, the people that I was just on a marketing blitz with were Sean O'Keefe from Mari, arguably the best winery in Michigan, Two Lads winemaker Thomas Hausman, Dave Boss. And so that really is a pretty familial relationship where everybody's excited about what the other's doing. And so that's the way it should be. That's the way it is in California too.
All right, let's get into round 3. I am excited. This one has more of a red.
Yeah,
flavor,
we've been
red color.
The color, yeah, we started off with a white, we've gotten into an orange, and now this is decidedly a red, unless I'm completely off in my wine guessing here.
It is a red. It is a light red. This is Pinot Noir from one vineyard in the Lake Michigan Shore AVA, so Southwest Michigan, called Herman Farms. They are an 8th-generation farming family in Michigan. Joe is primarily using organic practices. They're not certified, but really understands his property, tailing organics into the soil to suit each varietal, and just a nice dude. So this actually got its own labeling. It's called Le Poignet de Man, excuse me. In French, loosely translates to handshake. It's always a handshake deal. This is a kind of a Central Coast California style of Pinot Noir. Tastes like cherry Coke.
This tastes like a nice warm handshake. This is really good.
I've never licked a handshake, sir.
I said, well, fair enough. Well, maybe you haven't lived then, Jared. No, so I want to ask you, now that we're into the reds, in terms of Michigan. Again, I'm interested in kind of how the Michigan wine map works. Are there certain areas for reds and whites? Can you basically get a good red or a good white from any region in Michigan?
Yes, is the answer to both. We tend to see in Southwest Michigan about 10 to 15 additional days of ripening. So if we're looking to make a heavier bodied red wine, the weather is a little bit more favorable to that. Having said that, some of it is skill. And so I think that we've seen an increase of quality red wines being made in Michigan because there's been an increase of quality of winemakers that are coming to the state. I'm not saying I include myself in that, but if you look at Sean O'Keefe, he really understands how to maximize his property. He's on Old Mission Peninsula. But that can change year to year too. Like we have years where it's very cold, and so we will struggle to make like Cabernet Sauvignon.
So you mentioned this is what eighth generation. Do you sense that like these newer generations, people our age, let's say, do you have these kind of new winemakers who are part of these bloodlines for wine, like have innovative ideas and are making different kinds of varieties and different kinds of things that maybe their grandfather would have never thought to do?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Herman Farms, they weren't always growing grapes. They grow a lot of other stuff too. I think grape growing is their newest. It's been years, but it's their newest kind of venture. I think the Michigan wine industry is very young. Okay, so if we think that Napa Valley, in fact, was not considered a place to make premium wines until the 70s, Judgment of Paris, all of that. The first vinifera vines anyway, in Michigan weren't planted until the late 60s, early 70s up north. And we've had a lot of dogma. So we've had a lot of people for years and years saying we can only make sweet Riesling. We can only make X, Y, or Z. And so I think there have been some fresh eyes on the industry saying, no, we're going to make something we feel really strongly about it and we'll find its customer. And that's been refreshing. Climate change helps. I mean, it is warmer year over year. So we see fewer days below 5 below. And that's kind of like the cutoff point for growing vinifera. We'll lose a crop.
So I mean, the perception you alluded to that. The perception that I get even as a novice is that Michigan wine just overall tends to be sweeter. Tends to be a sweeter wine. Is that because of the climate, or is that because of again the skill, or a little bit of both?
It's because of the choice that was made, right? So I think it's fair to say a lot of people in Michigan have a sweet tooth. They like things a little sweeter. We drink a lot of Coke and Pepsi and Red Pop and Rock and Rye.
I know nothing about Faygo, nothing whatsoever, right?
And I think that there was a perception that that's what the customer wanted and that's what we were going to make. Riesling is disposed to that style of wine as well. And there was a lot of sweet wine in the market. So I think the market said Michigan only makes sweet wine because there were people like St. Julian making 400,000 cases of sweet wine. As we find more customers that like fine wines and sort of try to make wine for them, then we start to see that change. So I think we are seeing Michigan really is beginning to gain national recognition as a place that can grow and produce really good premium table wines that are dry.
Is there a certain wine that Michigan is, let's say, nationally, maybe regionally even known for? Like we do this really well.
I think everybody would say Riesling, but we are beginning to get a reputation for Blaufränkisch. We're beginning to get a reputation, I think, for Gamay. Those probably will be the big, emerging reds. Cabernet Franc has grown pretty widely here. I think people would say that. As a state, though, we haven't. I was actually just on a call about this. We really haven't settled on what do we do. If you think of Paso Robles, people would say, well, they make Rhones. That's what they do. But I don't think it's really smart as a state body to do that anyway. I think we have a better opportunity to tell stories of all these individual producers and growers than we should just say, okay, well, Michigan only makes Riesling. It's well, we can grow and produce a lot of good things.
All right, this next one, I noticed something about this bottle and that it says the Royce on it. So let us discuss this next one.
Yeah, we package a little bit of wine every year for the Royce. It's probably our best retail partner, hands down. Ping and Monaco have been very lovely to us. This is Blaufränkisch. We have it under the Detroit Vineyards label too, but this is just special for the Royce. They do their skin contact LGBT party every month. And so this is kind of inspired by that. But this is Blaufränkisch from Domaine Berrien Vineyard. And this is fermented carbonically. So if you've ever had Beaujolais is always carbonically fermented Gamay, and it's effectively an intercellular fermentation, if you want to be a nerd. The berries ferment from the inside out and explode. So we get a deeper hue of color, we get a lot more fruit, and we get some spice because the stems are included to the fermentation.
And you can pick it up.
Very smooth, very, very fruity, but not too sweet. Beaujolais. When I read the name of this wine, I was a little confused because I had never heard of it before, and again, novice. But I had heard Beaujolais, and I had ordered that at the Royce before because I really enjoyed it, and this tastes similar. Like that Beaujolais. Yeah.
So for someone listening at home who may not know, what is Beaujolais?
So Beaujolais is a region in France. So they are producing primarily Gamay, and so if you saw a table, Beaujolais would probably be 100% Gamay fermented carbonically.
Okay.
This wine is neither of those things. It's Blaufränkisch, also known as Lemberger, which is a varietal that was native to Austria and grows super, super well in Michigan. So I think as we increase plantings of red wine grapes, this is going to be one of the primary ones that we focus on.
So everyone's been hit by inflation, supply issues, all that kind of thing. How does that affect your industry? I feel like there's 50 different ways to answer this question with 50 different people who have been in your seat.
Anything that you would use to manufacture anything in the marketplace is experiencing a shortage right now.
Wow.
So that includes grapes because there are, technically speaking, I think more people trying to make wine than vineyards available right now. There has been a glass shortage since before COVID because of the tariffs on glass from China and Mexico, which is where most of the glass is produced. Corks go in and out of shortage. The cost of fuel is going to have an extreme impact on all of that this year because of freight. And if you look at what's going on in Ukraine right now, a lot of the fertilizers that we use are produced in Ukraine and Russia. Yeah. So it's a really interesting time to manufacture something because when you're used to saying, I have to bottle next month, I'm going to place my glass order, and your glass company comes back and says, we'll talk to you in 6 months, that can be a little jarring.
See, this is fascinating to me because everyone talks about buying local and doing things local. But even when you're so local that your name is literally Detroit Vineyards, there are global supply chain impacts.
Yeah.
Is there any advantage to kind of being somewhat localized compared to others?
Or being smaller?
Being smaller, I mean, I don't have to buy as much stuff. The only main distributor, not even manufacturer, of glass that I can think of is in Traverse City, and they've been bought out by an out-of-state company. So their pricing is actually higher than anybody else that I would use. The closest vendor that we use for most things is on the Canada side of Niagara, which has been incredibly problematic also because the border was closed for 2 years. So I had to teach myself to use our bottling line. We couldn't get a tech across the border. Supply chain manufacturing, I think if anybody that you talk to will say that it's not optimal right now.
What does the distribution look like now as far as outside of the state of Michigan? Or where are you available? How many states? Or
We can ship certain wines to 38 states from us, right? Direct ship. I don't have licensing for distribution anywhere else right now. And I'm sort of evaluating the value in it. I think there are certain states I'd like to be in, like California I'd like to be in just because all my friends are there.
Sure.
So like be able to sell wine there. But we don't make a ton of wine. And when you go into distribution, you lose half of your margin. So if I can sell 70% of our product out of my tasting room and we get 100% of that margin, those economies work a little bit better for our budget.
I think a lot of people out there in the world just assume if you're in X or if you're in X store, in X chain, you've made it. And that is a story that I have heard multiple times, not just from wine, but from beer as well, where there is so much taken out that is it even worth it to go that route?
Not if you're making a tiny amount of wine. Most of the laws that we deal with in alcoholic beverages are from Prohibition.
Byzantine and make no sense.
Literally, yes.
Yeah.
So, and they advantage people like Gallo because they have enough lobbying dollars to make those laws stay in place.
And they reinforce monopolies.
Right. So if you're a small producer, it is very difficult to get ahead in the broad market.
All right, just freshly poured is this last one out of the spring collection, and it is different than the others, to say the least.
Yeah, this is a Bordeaux blend that we released this spring. 70% Cabernet Franc, 30% Merlot, from a vineyard called Yuba Vineyard, which is east of Traverse City. If you come into the winery and see the packaging, there's actually a photo of the vineyard from my iPhone on the label. And it's a field blend, and it's a beautiful vineyard. That's how we arrived at the name, Field of Dreams. Pretty indicative of a Michigan Bordeaux. Lots of blueberry and cherry fruits, maybe a little bit lighter body. Lots of nice spice. It's actually a really cool property. Fun wine.
this is really good. A nice smooth red. I enjoy this as well. Can I ask you about kind of the perception, because Detroit Vineyards, I would imagine, elicits people from outside of Detroit or outside of Michigan to be really interested, or kind of maybe to them it's an oxymoron. Do you get a lot of kind of confusion or interest from outside of the state?
People from outside Michigan, at least my friends in California, actually tend to get what I'm doing more than people in Michigan do. The last one I worked for in California, we made 60,000 cases of wine and we didn't own a single vine. We brought all of our fruit. In Michigan, everybody tends to believe that if you don't exist in the middle of a vineyard, then you can't make wine. That's been kind of a trudge that we have to tell the story here. It's like, no, we work with all these great growers. We bring everything back to the city. But yeah, it's interesting how that message is received easier from out of state than it is here.
This seems to me as if you wouldn't expect a distiller to grow the grain, would you?
Yeah, people, it's really weird because nobody ever says that kind of thing about DCD or Brew Detroit or...
Do they have a farm field in Eastern
Right.
Market? No.
For everything else, everybody wants to buy local, but for us, it's like, well, why are you here? But I think it's, we do a cool thing. We're highlighting growers from across the state. We are
It's a
local,
good product.
It's Michigan only, and I'm saving you a drive. So with gas prices at $5, you can come to Detroit Vineyards and you don't have to go to Traverse City.
That's true. Before we leave, let's talk about that space really quick. We mentioned the 12,000 square feet. You can come to Detroit. You don't have to go to Traverse City. What will people expect? Kind of what are the hours? What are the things? Because we've tried a bunch of great wines. I know people are going to want to check them out. What can they do to get them?
We're open Wednesday through Sunday, right on the outside of Eastern Market. We open pretty much at 1 o'clock every day, Saturday and Sunday at noon. And then we're open till 8 during the week, 8:30 or 9 on the weekend. You can see the production facility from the tasting room. I'm there almost always. So that works to your benefit or not, I guess. And you can come in after work, have a glass of wine. You can share a bottle. We have tasting flights available every single day. You can make reservations if you want. We usually have room for walk-ins.
And I can go in and buy a bottle and take it home if I wanted
Please
to.
do, yes.
Yes, I would recommend it. I've done this. I've been to Detroit Vineyards a couple times. I recommend the tasting flight because then it helps inform you on what bottle you want to buy. And that's always helpful for me. Again, as a novice, I go in, I don't really know what I'm looking for yet, but I know what I like when I taste it. So if I taste 4 or 5 different wines, I can figure out what I want and what I want to buy a bottle of. So I appreciate that, and you do a great job with the flights.
And if you buy 3 bottles, your flight's free.
I think that's the winner for you,
Sold.
Devin.
Yeah.
Chris Southern, Detroit Vineyards, thank you for joining us again. I appreciate it. You always bring a smile to our podcast studio.
Thank you for having me.
Before I let you go, the team will be at All Things Detroit all day on Sunday. Be sure to go look them up, get a ticket. There will be a cornucopia of local businesses and shopping across 2 sheds of Eastern Market. We'll be at Shed 5. Look for the Daily Detroit Shield. Plus, Major League Soccer is coming to Detroit, but in a different way than some people expected. DCFC will be playing the Columbus Crew in the next stage of the Open Cup at home at Keyworth. That'll be an electric Michigan versus Ohio rivalry that you won't want to miss, and we'll talk about it on Monday. All right, that's enough for today. I'm Jer Stays. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.